Today, President Trump tries to crack down on social media companies. Plus, things keep getting worse for the airlines as employees now face mass layoffs. And we checked in with America's millionaires about their money habits during the coronavirus crisis. I'm Mackenzie Sagalos, and this is CNBC After Hours, Work From Home edition. Let's take a look at the scoreboard. A loss on Wall Street today as stocks sold off late in the day. Why? Well, stocks took a dive after President Trump announced that he's going to hold a press conference tomorrow to talk about China. Relations between the U.S. and China are tense, and they're getting worse on the back of China's latest steps to limit the independence of Hong Kong. Now, even though Hong Kong is part of China, it's enjoyed special status ever since the Chinese took control of the city from the British in the 90s. Hong Kong residents enjoy certain freedoms that those in mainland China do not. But today, Chinese parliament approved a law that gives China much more power to arrest and suppress the people of Hong Kong. All of this affects U.S. stocks because the U.S. could take steps to punish China for this new law, such as new sanctions or a reignited trade war. That's why the markets had such an immediate reaction when Trump announced his news conference. And now for three of today's biggest developments in the global coronavirus pandemic. First, another entrant into the race for a COVID-19 vaccine. Drug maker Novartis has agreed to manufacture a vaccine currently being developed by Harvard and other partners. This vaccine is expected to enter human trials later this year. Novartis is just the latest pharmaceutical company to begin work on a potential vaccine. Industry giants like Pfizer, Merck, and Johnson & Johnson are also trying to develop one, as are several other biotech firms. And second, international tourism is expected to fall by 70% in 2020, according to the UN's World Tourism Organization. Now, that's the biggest drop on record since they started measuring it in the 1950s. According to the UN, the lost business could put 110 million jobs around the world at risk. But while demand for international travel is super low, there appears to be a spike in interest for domestic travel here in the US. Google searches for the national parks are on the rise. Finally, the United States has passed a tragic milestone. 100,000 Americans have lost their lives to the coronavirus. COVID-19 has killed close to twice as many Americans as the Vietnam War did. Right now, 100,000 families are in mourning. And it's important to note the death toll keeps rising. As we cover the status of the reopened economy, we wanted to take a step back and remember just how many of our neighbors have died. Okay, let's get to our sound check. Today, Wall Street was focused on President Trump's new executive order targeting social media companies like Facebook and Twitter after two of his tweets were flagged as possibly misleading. The executive order focuses on something called Section 230, which is the specific clause of a 1996 law that shields social companies from liability for the content that its users create. Now, here's what some of the top newsmakers and business leaders had to say on CNBC about the growing techlash in Washington, D.C.
I think we've been pretty clear on what I think the right approach is, which is that I don't think that Facebook or internet platforms in general should be arbiters of truth. I think that's a kind of a dangerous line to get down to in terms of deciding what is true and what isn't. And I think political speech is one of the most sensitive parts in a democracy. And people should be able to see what politicians say. Our policies are grounded in trying to give people as much a voice as possible while saying, if you're going to harm people in specific ways, right? If you're going to do something that's going to cause violence, or if you're saying that something is a cure to a disease that has been proven to be a cure, but it's not, and that could lead people to either not seek another treatment or do something that could be harmful, we'll take that down no matter who says that.
I agree with Mark that internet platforms should not be arbiters of truth. The issue that we're dealing with here is really basic. The business model of Facebook, of Twitter, of Instagram, of YouTube is based on capturing our attention and manipulating it. The way they do that is with algorithms that amplify the content that engages us emotionally. That is hate speech. That is disinformation. It is conspiracy theories. The business model is based on that kind of content. So the issue here is not that President Trump has said something false on Twitter or on Facebook. It's the fact that the algorithms amplify that content intensely to the point where it blocks out all of the legitimate facts that are in the marketplace, so people don't find out the truth.
I'm skeptical from a legal perspective I've reviewed what the draft of the executive order that's been circulated, and it's not clear that the White House has the authority to tell the Commerce Department to tell the FCC to do a rulemaking. It's not clear that they have the FTC has the power to do the type of review they're talking about, and it's in fact probably a First Amendment violation for the White House to tell government agencies not to advertise based on content.
I think it's a dead end, because in the end, this is not a presidential. There's this First Amendment. There's Commerce Clause. There's a lot of people in Congress, Justice, and the Supreme Court are all going to get involved in this thing in the end. Justice, obviously, already. And so an executive order is the beginning, not the end.
As lockdowns gradually end, everyone wants to know when the broader economy will be back to the booming status that it had before the coronavirus crisis. One of the biggest components of the economy is consumer spending, and it's pretty easy to understand why. The more money people spend at businesses, the better those companies perform. But in trying to answer that bigger question about when the economy will bounce back, CNBC asked a very important group of people. Rich people. And according to them, things are going to take a little while to get back to normal. CNBC Wealth editor Robert Frank has the numbers.
So the CNBC Millionaire survey, we poll more than 750 people with investable assets of at least $1 million. And the reason that this group is important is because they own more than 85% of the stocks in the stock market, and they are a big part of the consumer economy. And this survey, which we did in late April, had a big warning sign out there for some of the optimism that we see in the market. On the market side, they are a little bit bearish. They bought stocks in March as things were declining, but now they are holding off. They are holding a lot of cash. They don't plan to put a lot of money into stocks going into the year. And many expect the markets won't regain their highs until at least next year, maybe even 2 years from now. Now, on the spending side, also a big warning sign from the wealthy. Remember, this is the group that has not suffered so much from this crisis. More than 3/4 of millionaires have not seen any decline in their incomes or their assets, but many are postponing purchases, mainly of real estate, cars, and vacations. And when we ask them, when are you going to complete those purchases, i.e., when will the sun come out for you as consumers, many say it will be at least next year or even later. So this does not bode well for a V-shaped recovery, because this is the group with the most money, but they're just not in the mood to spend right now. When you look at their outlook for the economy, more than half think that this recession will be longer than the Great Recession. So even though they have the money, their view of the economy and the risk to this market, not just from the pandemic, but the upcoming election, just makes them cautious about whether it's spending or buying stocks right now.
Okay, and before we leave, it's time for a numbers round. Today, we're looking at one piece of the absolutely devastated travel and leisure industry, airlines. This week, multiple companies in the space have announced cost cutting and job cuts, which means the executives are not forecasting a quick bounce back in air travel. In fact, quite the opposite. These layoffs indicate that the industry is bracing for months and even years more of slower sales and lower revenues. So with that in mind, let's kick it off with 30. American Airlines is planning a 30% reduction of its management and administrative staff. That's roughly 5,000 jobs. The company is offering buyouts to these workers as it scrambles to cut costs in the wake of the toll that COVID-19 has taken on its business. And beginning next month, American will also start offering buyouts and voluntary leave to a different set of employees. It's pilots and flight attendants. Next, 25. Delta is offering an enhanced early retirement package to employees with at least 25 years of service. The airline is also offering a separate voluntary buyout package to other workers. Remember, Delta took federal bailout money from the $2 trillion CARES Act that Congress passed, which means they can't lay off any employees until the money runs out at the end of September. So this voluntary leave program is a way to cut payroll expenses before then. Also, the Delta CEO mentioned in his memo to the company that he believes it will be 2 or 3 years before demand for plane travel returns to where it was before the pandemic. And finally, 6,770. Plane maker Boeing will lay off 6,770 employees, roughly 10% of its workforce. Boeing also said thousands of other employees will be let go in the coming months. Boeing's business depends on the health of the airline industry, and since the coronavirus has nearly eliminated demand for air travel, Boeing's customers, aka the airlines, are posting their first losses in years, and therefore they're not buying or leasing more of the planes that Boeing builds. That's it for After Hours. Stay up to date in real time with CNBC. We'll be closely watching protests in Hong Kong and the escalating tensions between the US and China ahead of Trump's news conference tomorrow. Be sure to catch the president's briefing, along with every development in this historic battle against coronavirus and the unprecedented economic fallout by going to CNBC.com and downloading the CNBC app. We'll be right here in our home office every Tuesday and Thursday with a new edition of After Hours, so be sure to catch us then. In the meantime, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.